I speak today on Podcast for Inquiry with Kristin Wintermute and Emily Newman of the American Humanist Association. Kristin is the Education Director at the AHA's Center for Education. She is a lifelong humanist and was Executive Director of the Humanist Institute before it merged with AHA in 2018. Kristin also worked for over 7 years as a family therapist in a variety of settings. Emily Newman is the Senior Education Coordinator at the American Humanist Association's Center for Education. She previously worked as the Development and Communications Assistant for the Humanist Institute and the Communications Coordinator for the American Ethical Union. Emily grew up in ethical culture and is active with several secular and religious humanist communities. In today's episode, I speak with Emily and Kristin about the American Humanist Association Center for Education's 10 commitments, what they are, and the practical applications of each in a humanist's life. I bring you my conversation with Kristin Wintermute and Emily Newman. Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. Kristin Wintermute and Emily Newman of the American Humanist Association, welcome and thank you for talking to me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
I wanted to bring you on today because I was just surfing the web and I found a very interesting page that the two of you developed and have posted, and it's called the 10 Commitments, which sounds an awful lot like 10 other things that are very popular in our culture today. And I was hoping you could tell me, before we get into what the 10 commitments are, what the origin was of you coming up with them and what motivated you to create the 10 humanist commitments.
I can go ahead. Actually, we inherited the 10 commitments. The Center for Education was an independent organization called the Humanist Institute. And in 2017, is that right, Emily? Or 16? 17.
I think the discussions happened in 17 and the actual merge started in January 2018.
Yeah. So we dissolved the independent organization and formed the Center for Education. And in doing so, we inherited what the AHA had already developed called the COCHAR Education Center. And within there, they had a primary person involved in that had come up with the 10 commitments, but they hadn't done very much with it. It sort of was just kind of sitting there in the background. Their hope was that they could get it into the school systems across the United States. But the problem is our school systems, most of them, for now, separation of church and state. So they just kind of sat there for a long time. And when we picked them up, we said, you know what, we probably could do something with these. So there was a small description, and we took the small description and made them into bigger descriptions. And kind of fleshed it out. And then we had this wonderful graphic designer who created the wheel, which is behind Emily. Yeah. And so off and running we went. We put them up on the website. We started talking about them. And I think, how many posters have we sold?
Oh, it's been, I think, about 100 to 200 each year. And I guess I feel like we started producing and selling them either late 2018 or 2019.
Yeah. So the brainchild of this is his name is Pritpal Kochar, and his impetus was really he was really tired of the debate of what is humanism, everyone's sitting in circles. How do you define humanism? What does it mean? And what he wanted to do was, really make a practical application. And so he came up with these 10 items. I don't know why he chose 10. 5 was too little, 15 too much. He landed on 10. And I really think one of the things that you had asked us before this session is, what didn't make it? And I think there isn't anything on the cutting room floor. Yeah, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, 10 is kind of a natural number for humans anyway, because we have 10 digits on our hands, and 10 digits on our toes. Our numerical system, we've landed not all of humanity at all times, but we've landed on base 10. And well, there's something that sounds very similar to the 10 commitments, which goes back just a little bit further, called the 10 commandments. And so I think it's kind of a natural number for him to have chosen.
Yeah.
So we have talked on Podcast for Inquiry about humanism a fair amount, and it's been fairly philosophical. We spoke about the Amsterdam Declaration and sort of comparing it to some of the humanist manifestos that have also been published over the years. But I do like as you mentioned, Kristin, the practical focus of, okay, fine, there's the humanists, there's beliefs, there's philosophy, but what do you do day to day, and how can you apply these lofty theoretical, perhaps even academic principles that you may claim to adhere to, and what do you do uh, uh, with them, and what do you do with your time and your energy and your efforts on a day-to-day basis? And the real reason that I wanted to bring you on is that a lot of them resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it wasn't just a good idea in the abstract, but when I read into them, that was like I hadn't articulated my thoughts and beliefs and feelings in the same way. But when I think about why I am a humanist, why I am a secular activist, the 10 commitments really shone through for a lot of them. And even those that aren't the highest priority for me in my day-to-day actions are still things that I think are a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I think rather than in the spirit of the 10 commitments, instead of talking about background and philosophy and history, let's with your permission, I'd like to get into them and sort of and talk about what the 10 commitments are and how they are applied. And please feel free to use examples from your own life and those from your community. And I'll just take it in the same order that I see them on the website. And we want to start with altruism. And I think with each one of these, tell me, what it is, what it means, and how it's connected to a humanist philosophy.
I will say that before we dive into it, I think that Pripal's intention was to inspire people into activism. So your point of not just sitting around talking about, well, I define humanism this way, or I define it this way, or I define it this way. He really wanted to say, let's be done with this and let's put our values into action. Let's move along and have humanism be a practical part, or a part of our daily lives. Like, how do we do our humanism was his big thing. And I think for I won't speak for Emily, but in regards to altruism, I just think that especially in this day and age, doing acts of kindness for the sake of doing them without reward is something that we need to be reminded of in this, especially in the US, with our uh, Congress being at each other's throats and the fake news and all this stuff. It just, these random acts of kindness seem to have gone away. It's more like random acts of hatred, and that the MAGA culture. So I just think that starting with altruism, it's really an important value that we need to remind ourselves that taking care of others and doing it just for the sake of doing it is important.
We have them listed in alphabetical order, and we sometimes will say like there is no priority, there's no favoritism to these. They're all valuable and they link together very nicely.
Mhm.
But I do find that it's interesting that we're able to start with altruism, because I think that a lot of people do define their humanism with that detail of not being dependent or reliant on a deity or a promise or question of an afterlife. And that's where we kind of get into the good for goodness sake concept of we're trying to alleviate suffering and hardship, where we want to focus on caring about each other, not just like brownie points, not just credits, that invisible credits, but because
Mhm.
that's going to better society.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I've long thought that there is no celestial safety net. That species have gone extinct, and there's no reason. And humanity is not special. I am not special as an individual, and we as a species are not special or unique. And we are constrained by the laws of chemistry and physics, but within that, we get to choose collectively how much we thrive or how much we suffer. And the great acts of altruism that people have made are a credit to our species, and the acts of barbarity that regrettably we have and continue to perpetrate upon each other is also our collective responsibility. And if we want the world to be a better place than it is, then it is up to us to make it so. And I that's something that I've long held, and I like starting with altruism on that basis as well, because if we want to improve things, then we need to do it. And I mean, and even religious traditions also come up with that. Like, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Right? This is not unique to humanism, but it is, I think, important to acknowledge that it's core and central. So thank you. And then we go on to another thing that is
Well, before you move on, I just want
sure.
you to
Yep.
mention like the religious similarities. There's also an activist world, the like we are the ones we've been waiting for, and very much about like empower. We're not special, but we have such power and potential, and we can uplift each other's. Recognize the power and potential in other people. So there's, I just note that because I feel like sometimes we get stuck a little bit in comparing ourselves to religions, and there's so much other knowledge and experience
Oh, of
that we
course.
can also gain from. I know you weren't limiting us, but I'm just throwing another thought in
Yeah,
there.
yeah, and what you were saying before, I also like the idea of we are what we do. Like, you can
Mhm.
think whatever you wish, you can believe whatever you wish, but ultimately, I think you are what you do, and it's your actions and their impacts that count more than your philosophies or worldviews. And so the connection to activism or altruism and these other commitments, I think, is very important.
Well,
Uh,
actions speak louder than words. And we don't have doctrine and dogma that tells us how to behave, right? I mean, even religious people, they may not even follow that doctrine that they have that says, this is what you need to do to be a good person. And so, all we have is our values and how we act upon those.
right. And we can discuss them, dispute them, and ideally improve them over time. So and in fact, you hinted at that earlier. Like, you inherited a brief list and then expanded on them and
Well,
made
I
them
just thought
better.
they were so cool and they were just sitting there. No
Yeah.
one was doing anything with them. And Prapal is a friend of mine and he says, "What I really, really, really want you to do when you become director of education, I want you to take the 10 commitments and run with them." And so we did. Um, yeah.
And we want to make them accessible and digestible so they resonate with more people. And we've found that like they have sometimes people really appreciate the I will statements because they don't need that whole chunk of text, or being able to a lot of religious folks at Parliament of the World's Religions go like, this is really the core. And then my religious beliefs are like additional or special to me. But this is kind of like almost the similar to the golden rule concept that people can all
That's been
grasp.
translated in various religions. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Pretty much every society and civilization has had its variant of the golden rule throughout
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, it's funny that Emily mentions the Parliament of World Religions. We were there, we had a table, and we had coloring pages for the 10 Commitments, and kids came and colored, and adults came and colored too. But we did catch the eye of this group called Spiritual Playdate. And they loved these 10 commitments. It's like, oh, I really resonate with this. Oh, this is what I believe. And so now they invited us to be an advisor on there, to be, to include humanism and our 10 commitments and our values, because they resonated so much with them. It was pretty
That's
cool,
that's
actually.
wonderful.
Yeah, it was fun.
All right, so we'll move on then to this. Well, I don't want to rank them to the next one. It's the second in our list, but not the second in order or priority. Is one that's actually also very near and dear to my heart, and something I've tried to both practice and disseminate through the world, or at least in my interactions, and that is critical thinking. And the "I will" statement is, I will practice good judgment by asking questions and thinking for myself. And Kristin, Emily, if you'd like to expand on that, please do so.
I feel for me that critical thinking is the key to humanism. It, because in the religious world, people fall back on, oh, it's God's will, or this is what God wants me to do. Well, we don't have that to fall back on. All we have is our ability to think critically about situations and our actions, which we were just talking about. How do my actions impact other people? Or how do I decipher this information that is coming my way? Or how do I understand something in the world? Like, how do I understand why it rains? How do I understand it's, that critical thinking, that scientific method of being able to understand the world and things around us by using our minds to decipher and gain information and knowledge, and to advance ourselves and to be better people. Um, Emily, you want to add to that your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like the critical thinking will include science and skepticism and inquiry. So it definitely it connects to the heart of how people feel like they came to humanism, because they asked questions they weren't allowed to. They read books to get a fuller picture of the world. They had experiences or learned about other experiences that led them to new concepts. And we know that this is important at all ages, because children are always asking why, and our answer on either ignoring them or directing them to information or helping them solve the problem really goes a long way to how they explore information or filter it as the may need be throughout their lives. And I also like to point out that humanists are lifelong learners, where we may be experts in certain fields, but there's always opportunities to develop. So that is also kind of an important emphasis on the improvement of ourselves, separate from altruism being the improvement of society.
What's interesting is you bring up that we're lifelong learners and study, and are inquisitive and seek truth and meaning and knowledge and critical thinking as a part of that. We at the Center for Education, we manage the Humanist Society, which endorses celebrants and chaplains and lay leaders. And in part of working with the Humanist Society, we do interviews with celebrants. And many, many celebrants, the story is always this: how did you come to humanism? Is one of the questions we ask in the interview. And they often, the story is, well, I was a fundamentalist evangelical in a university studying the Bible, critically studying the Bible, when it all started to fall apart.
Right.
because it didn't make sense. And then or I had one guy that said, I had gone to fundamental evangelical schools all my life until I sought to get a PhD in biology. And the program that he wanted was not available in a fundamentalist evangelical university. So he had to go into a public university. And he says, no lie, I was 25 years old when I discovered evolution,
Hmm.
because they didn't teach it in any of these fundamental. And he was like, that just broke apart my entire world, because they were teaching creationism, and he was like, I'm a biologist. So I thought that was kind of funny, but critical thinking is a part of, what we do to, understand the world. And so these fundamentalists get study hard and get into it. And they're like, wait, none of this makes sense. So,
Yeah, and I mean, the idea that we have to think for ourselves, also involved with critical thinking, at least from my perspective, is we have to. Who are we going to trust? Because it's a very large and complex world, and no matter how much you know, and I respect both of your learning and expertise, but you don't know much, and neither do I. No single person does. There's so much knowledge out there. So if we want to know about evolution, well, you can be a PhD a student of biology, and you're going to develop that expertise. I myself, I'm not a scientist, fascinated with science, try and learn as much as I can, but I am definitely a layperson. So if I want to learn about biology or physics, chemistry, any aspect of science, I I don't have the time to delve deep and develop that knowledge directly from first principles from the ground up. I have to go to uh, people that I trust are going to be honest and
mm,
give an accurate view of things, and so it becomes at that point less critical thinking about the subject itself, but sort of on a meta level, you apply critical filters to who you're going to listen to and who you're going to trust to learn from, and then of course don't take their word as I was about to say as gospel, but I want to avoid religious metaphors here, but as unassailable, right?
yeah.
They too, despite their education, despite their expertise, they are human and they are fallible, and they're probably right about most things in their area of expertise. But they might be mistaken about some of the details. And no matter how intelligent they are, or even if they're the foremost person in their field, when they stray, if they're a scientist, for example, and they start making political commentary, it might be insightful because they're intelligent individuals, but they could also be quite faulty because they don't understand the deep history or the context or how things might backfire. And so, always applying a critical lens, even to the folks that you greatly respect. And do listen to is also very important, and what I have been working on a lot in the last few years is uh, less the basic critical thinking tools, because I spent years on that, and I think I've got a pretty good tool set, but and more on who do I listen to, who do I trust, what are trusted sources of information, and how much trust do I place in them, and it's easy at the extremes. I really like this source, so I'll barring countervailing evidence, I'm just going to believe them, or that source is going to be that source is unreliable. I'm just going to ignore them entirely. But there's a lot in the middle, and how you can say they're probably trustworthy but not entirely, and keeping that in mind is a real challenge, and one that I personally am still struggling with. But that's why it's I think very very important to inculcate those skills in as many people as possible and allow them to draw their own conclusions about things based on facts and reason, and not on somebody charismatic said so, or someone that is in the position of authority said so, because they might be right, but it's also how one can get bamboozled.
I will out Emily and I a little bit. We are lifelong humanists. She growing up in the ethical culture tradition, and myself growing up in a humanist UU. And one of the things about critical thinking, the last line of critical thinking is, challenging our bias and being paving the way to be fair, open-minded, and autonomous, and fostering a multicultural worldview. And for me, within humanist circles, and Emily and I have talked about this a lot, is that growing up as humanist or ethical culture traditions, um, we have a unique perspective in that um, I struggle within our humanist circles with people that are anti-religious. Why are you working with those religious people? Why are you? And I say, because we need a voice at the table, and part of the critical thinking is, you know, I want to remain open minded. I don't believe what you believe, but you're a human being, and I can hear what you're saying. I could find the common ground, and it's really important for me to have that fair minded, open perspective, and critical thinking really helps me come to the table and say, all right, fine. You got some cool gods. I'm all good with that, but and I don't believe that. So I think our community could really benefit from being more open-minded and being more like, okay, don't shove your religion down my throat, but let's find the common ground because we're both human.
Right.
um,
And particularly with political activism, if you agree with me on these two issues, I'm quite happy. Personally, I'm a secular activist, and I've worked with not just other secular activists or non-believers of various stripes, but also in some cases with religious folk, because they agree that favoring this group is not fair, and they believe in equality principles. Great, we come to the same conclusion from different philosophical approaches. And if you want to have the conversation about your faith and my lack of it, I'm happy to have that
right.
conversation. But more directly, I am delighted to work with you towards our shared goal. And then next year, if we're on opposite sides of an issue, I'll explain why I think you're wrong. But I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you, despite our philosophical differences on this issue. That comes back to what we were saying before: is like it matters less what you think and believe, and more about what you do, in terms of at least how I judge people's moral character.
Mhm.
And that actually sort of segues into the next one, empathy. And I mean, the CFI's tagline is reason, compassion, and secular values. And so I tend to use the word compassion more than empathy, but I think they're broadly synonymous, or at least large overlaps between them. And the empathy I will statement is, I will consider other people's thoughts, feelings, and experiences. So, Emily, Kristin, if you'd like to expand on that.
I agree with you. It was a great segue between the concept of um, more interfaith discussions and or working towards similar goals with each other and trying to understand another person's perspective. I think some people find empathy challenging because they're so we're often told that like sympathy is the right way to go, and sympathy doesn't go quite as deep enough because it's not about it's kind of giving support on a more surface level as opposed to really trying to understand the person. Not to say it's wrong, just it helps to go a little deeper, because I think with empathy you also get to that altruistic relieving suffering and figuring out the right course of action for the other person. So we mentioned the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do. But with empathy, you're really saying, well, what do you want me to do? What do you need from me? And I think one of the best examples I tend to come up with is, sometimes you want to vent and you want to share and you want to complain and you want someone to listen. And other times you want a solution, you want to brainstorm, you want to figure things out. And the figuring out the person's needs is best way to avoid bigger frustrations, issues, because maybe you need to do both, but you kind of you're not ready to be told what to do right away when you're sharing your feelings. And I also was thinking too of I have a really close friend who's a dedicated Christian, And she was once given like a homework assignment from her church to ask an atheist a bunch of questions. And I feel like it was, I don't know exactly their impetus for this like exercise, but I thought it was adorable because here she could have the safe space, you know, a person she trusted and loves. Neither of us felt attacked. And she could even get into some of the more awkward, like, so what do you think of Jesus? Or so how does like love come in? Because she needed to kind of break the stereotypes that had been, you know, taught to her. And I did say, you know, I'm not the ultimate, I'm not even necessarily like a great atheist compared to other more public strong-minded atheists. I'm definitely not ready to debate the Bible with folks. But I feel like by addressing her questions or giving her other questions to help her explore her own beliefs, we we deepened our relationship because you know, we don't really have a whole lot of opportunities with our friends and family sometimes to get into those awkward moments.
I think empathy is so important that, and Denmark would agree with me. They actually in Denmark have in their public schools intentional teaching of empathy.
Wow.
So it's a whole program. And I was doing some research on empathy for the 10 Commitments, and I was like, wow, this country is the second or third happiest country in the world. And it's because, and they say it's because we intentionally teach empathy in our school systems, and that builds tolerance, like Emily was talking about with her friend. You know, her friend was in a safe space, could begin to understand Emily's perspective, and it builds tolerance and it builds relationships. So in Denmark, they have this whole program in the schools where they will partner kids to teach empathy. For instance, a child that is really, really good at math and another child that's struggling with math, they'll partner them together, and it helps them understand each other. Like, let me help you learn math, and they can get to know that, oh, I see you're struggling in this way. And it builds relationships, it builds compassion, as you said, for other people. So I think I wish we would teach empathy in our school systems. And I think we're so in the US, and I don't know about Canada, but we're so worried about getting the fundamental skills, math and reading, and that character education has kind of gone out the door, and we forget that kids need to learn, how to be tolerant and how to understand someone else's perspective.
Yeah, here it's. I think the U.S. is a little bit more extreme, but in most things, Canada is either is generally aligned with the United States, if perhaps a little bit softer, or perhaps maybe only 5 years behind. But certainly culturally, where there are differences, but broadly speaking, we're largely quite similar.
Mhm.
And yeah, civics and um, character development is something that is not emphasized in our school system.
Well, it used to be, and then they decided that performance was better. I
Reading,
don't
writing,
know.
arithmetic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on then to environmentalism. I will take care of the earth and the life on it. And generally speaking, I'm an optimistic person. I think that we have made great strides. We've got a long way to go, so it's kind of an exciting time to be alive. But I generally think that life today is better for more people and most people than at any point in our species history. But I am concerned that we may be the last or next to last generation for which that will be true. And that is not because we are becoming morally degenerate, but because we are despoiling our environment, primarily through greenhouse gases and global warming, and not taking the steps that we need to in order to avoid essentially cooking the planet. And I
Mhm.
am not terribly optimistic on that based on our current performance. And so highlighting the importance of environmentalism is actually very important to me, because I want us and our collective descendants to continue to thrive. And for that, we definitely need to take care of the earth and the life on it. So, sorry. Usually, I should let you expand on that topic. So that's
No,
my
it's
little
fine.
piece.
I mean, no, I'm resonating with you completely. And as you were talking, I'm reading the last line. Each of us must acknowledge our collective and individual mistakes, repair past damages, and purposely work toward cultivating rich, diverse, and resilient ecosystems. And I think the thing for me, and probably for everyone in this little space here, it's super frustrating that capitalism and money and the desire to, have more of the financial stuff really gets in the way of being collectively responsible and repairing our mistakes. And it's frustrating because we just keep talking about it, and it feels like the needle isn't moving, and I know it is. Electrical cars are coming out. People are talking about solutions. Here in the state of Minnesota, I was just listening to a National Public Radio report on this architectural firm that is, it's expensive, but they're now building eco-friendly houses that lower the emissions of the walls are 10-inch thick, but they it's more eco-friendly, and I think I anyways, I'm resonating with you guys in that, or with you what you said, Leslie, that um, yeah, I'm worried about the planet. I think we all are.
Yeah, and I try to stay optimistic just so I don't get super depressed about it. I grew up definitely at a time where they were putting more environmentalism and recycle, reuse kind of education into the school system. So that's always been top of my mind. I remember I once was part of like the no drip patrol, so we made sure that like the water was always turned off, and I still bother my family about that because it was a simple task that I could take responsibility for, that I had learned it was part of a bigger water saving movement. And it is, I've talked about environmentalism with younger generations when we've shared the 10 commitments with them. And it's fascinating to see the different connections people have with the work based on their generation or the region they grew up in, and the fear that they have over the consequences. So, I feel like I was very much interested in those kind of small, independent, or even like small group tasks. And some folks in Gen Z are a lot less optimistic than I am because they're seeing the what's happened with the lack of bigger actions. And but at the same time, we have had a lot of youth led environmental strikes, climate strikes, and protests, which have kind of, I think, re-inspired some older generations. So sometimes I feel like this may be one of those few issues we can all agree on to some degree, and hopefully we find multiple ways to take action, because it is definitely frustrating to be like, well, why should I cut down on how often I take a car somewhere when this celebrity and this politician are taking private jets every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter, I have a funny story. So my daughter in high school, speaking of the younger generation, she was president of the Earth Club, which drove me crazy because I had to get up at 5 o'clock to get her to the before school Earth Club meeting. But one of the things she did, which we discovered, is she decided she was going to compost, but she just kept throwing stuff in this garden area, but she didn't really know how to compost. So after the snow melted, we went out to look at the garden, and there's all these eggshells. I'm like, Anya, why did you do that? She was like, well, I was composting. I'm like, yeah, it kind of doesn't work that way. It was pretty funny. But now I'm proud to say that city of Minneapolis and in the state of Minnesota um, has citywide composting, so they pick up our composting, which was a huge effort on the part of our city council. So and now I have a place to put my composting instead of my garden.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that we're at a point where we need systemic level changes and actions, and every bit helps. But the magnitude of the problem is so much that we need citywide compost and
Yeah,
uh,
well, and I think
binding commitments on companies and countries to.
yeah, well, and my kids, being the Gen Z, are kind of interesting because, I never thought about this, but the fashion industry, how horrible it is. And my son came home from college and he's like, I need some jeans and I need a couple of shirts. And I said, great, you want to go to Target? No, let's go to the thrift store.
Right.
I mean, and so their behavior is really changing, and they're leading the way for me. And oh wow, maybe I could go to the thrift store.
Right. And for those that are interested, we actually had an episode of Podcast for Inquiry, came out in November, December of 2022 with Jasmine Brar. And the topic was how youth can take climate action. And she's very passionate, and that's what she does. So if folks are interested in more on that topic, listen to that episode. I think it's episode 22 from our first season. All right, so let's move on to ethical development. I will always focus on becoming a better person. And I'm trying to come up with how anyone could object to that, but I'm not sure. But I'll let you. Maybe your imagination is bigger than mine, and
I
why
think
you.
if you were a narcissist, you'd have a hard time.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
already so good. There's actually no room for improvement.
right,
Ah, okay.
exactly.
Well, I'm glad, Kristin, you're very perceptive that you could tell that of me after knowing me for such a short period of time. But very well, I acknowledge that truth. Let's talk a bit about ethical development.
I'll let our ethical culturalist Emily
Okay.
jump in.
Well, I think that so often people assume that you need to be religious to be ethical. Like that's the only way to be a good person. Um, and while we don't have, as Christian said, a dogma, so we don't have like the clear cut rules: do this or you get smited, do this and you get sainthood. It is kind of like critical thinking. It's definitely a process that we're always doing reflection and evaluation. And as I mentioned about, that this happens at every level, like children understand fairness from a very young age.
Mm.
And, but that tends to be pretty binary originally. And they like, as they develop and as they get, taught by various people, they understand the importance of cooperation and why sometimes things are not shared, and or why they don't get their way all the time, which I think some adults are still learning. And yeah, it very much kind of goes to that: how do we connect with each other, because we have different needs and different wants, but that's hopefully we're not letting one person overpower another. And we mentioned too about like the connection of all these. I feel like you really can't have ethical development without empathy and altruism and critical thinking, because that's how you're developing, that's how you're getting to that point of being able to morally interact with people.
Mhm. I think ethical development for me, in a previous life, I was a therapist. So it's everything about, people come to therapy because, the world has fallen apart or they're struggling. And, the whole aspect of therapy is helping them to develop their inner selves and to develop their sense like self-awareness, learning the cooperation, learning that, life isn't fair, or, how can I approach this? And um, I think it's just it's underpinning of humanity. It's even written in religion. The underpinnings of, a lot of religion is, how to ethically and morally behave. And, so we've written it into doctrine and dogma. So it's sort of this fundamental human thing, right? As Emily said, as kids, you somebody steals your toy in the play group, and you're like, hey, and you start to cry. That wasn't fair. So I don't know what else to say about ethical development. It's sort of a human instinct to try to be better.
Well, we're social storytelling animals, and the social aspect of things means that we need to interact with each other. And how do if we interact with each other, certain things lead to mutual thriving,
Mm.
certain other actions lead to mutual suffering, and some interactions lead to one person's benefiting at another person's expense. And so you can think of ethical development is of how you can increase the number of your interactions that lead to mutual thriving or mutual beneficial. Everybody comes out better for having interacted with you, for having experienced some time with you. And certainly from a humanist perspective, it is up to us. And
Mhm.
all of these, and I like, Emily, what you said is that uh, all of these so far have been, in a sense, very different, but they connect and reinforce each other. And now we come to global awareness. And this one, I'll read the I will statement. I will be a good neighbor to the people who share the earth with me and help make the world a better place for everyone. And this one connects and in a sense overlaps, at least in my mind, with both with both the ethical development, being a good neighbor and making the world a better place. That's part of ethical development, and it's also part of environmentalism. And so this is the first one where I thought, is this really necessary as its own standalone thing? And I'm pretty sure that you're going to tell me why global awareness should stand alone. And so I encourage you to please do so.
I would say Gaza. I mean, I think global awareness isn't just about, uh, how do I put it? In the US, we have a race problem. I mean, across the globe, we have a race problem, right? And specifically in our history in the US, um, with slavery, essentially, both African, Asian, and how we treat, being globally aware helps you understand our differences, and it helps us embrace the difference. And I just think that my family lived in Brussels, Belgium, for 6 years, and I didn't realize the immense amount of diversity and in Western Europe, and until I went there, America the Great kind of thing. Our world is the best world, and becoming more globally, traveling and becoming more globally aware, really helped me understand people better. Um, does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of what we talked about before was we talked about like people to people interactions, but that's still often with the people that we're directly seeing in front of us or talking to maybe online. Um, but there's so many more people, there's so many more places that we still are connected. And I think that the pandemic made that commitment really resonate for folks, that awareness that we may have borders in terms of where the land ends or where the government says we own, but we don't really have borders when it comes to people and culture, because ideas spread and disease spreads and violence spreads, and we have an impact on how they spread or how we spread positive things to counteract that. And you
Well,
we
the global economy too. I mean,
Right.
you think about the internet comes in and all of a sudden our world shrinks, right? Because we're more connected in ways that we've never been before, because of the internet and our economic systems, our political systems. I mean, we're more aware of. I mean, I mentioned Gaza, but um, you know that what's going on there is impacting everyone. Um, Sorry, I interrupted you, Emily, but I wanted to add that piece in there.
Yeah, you're right. Because also, like, for example, what's happening in Gaza is impacting the protests and reactions on college campuses because of how our government and how their institutions are connecting to that. And obviously, we don't have the time or energy to get into all of that stuff. That's not our job. But what is our job is, we're American Humanist Association. You are CFI Canada, but we're connected to Humanist International because there are various other humanist groups, or an atheist and secular groups around the world, and um, there is a hunger to better connect and share resources so that we can further spread humanism and make it more normalized, more popular, less mislabeled,
Mhm.
and use, and in that spreading of humanism, kind of respond to or impact a lot of the suffering and the troubles going on in society. So I think um, the the importance of keeping the global awareness as a commitment is kind of, okay, so we've got the critical thinking within ourselves, we've got the empathy and altruism connecting us to people, but we got to like kind of keep expanding. And I will say there's definitely strong connections between the global awareness and the environmentalism, but I feel like there's still the difference between
I think
the
it's different,
difference
because we
between the
have this.
living beings and the how the beings interact and run together.
Yeah, I think for the person that came up with these 10 commitments, Pripal Kochar is from India. He's a Sikh, ethnically a Sikh. And for him, global awareness is really, really important because he comes from a different culture. And when he came to America, a lot of people didn't understand him. His accent was thick, didn't understand the world he came from, the Sikh world. And for him, being globally aware, I will is super was super important because we get stuck in our little silos of worlds, and we're not aware of other people. um, One of the things that we're doing at the American Humanist Association this summer is we're piloting a uh, humanist worldview then and now course in with people in Africa. We had one of the Humanist International folks came to us and said, we need to spread humanism across the globe. And here in Africa, we have people who are hungry, but we need to teach them more about the humanist philosophy, and the expressions of humanism across the globe are very, very different. Humanism in China has its history and Confucianism and Taoism. There's an expression of humanism in India that is very different, in Latin America. So I think global awareness, especially for Prepal, was, we need to understand the cultures and our rich diversity across this globe, not just, the environmentalism or being, altruistic towards others. It's hard to be altruistic if you don't understand somebody else's culture,
Right.
or empathetic too.
Yeah. And that leads us into leads in a way directly to humility
And,
and
and
the
I'll bring up Prapal again, and the humility one. His story was one of, he grew up in a very, very, very poor He told this story once to me about um, his father spent all their money just to purchase. He worked hard and worked hard and worked hard, and he works hard enough to get an orange for him and his brother. And this was an immense gift. And as he was able to go to college and become a an affluent person, for him, that those little acts of being humble, not being so boastful, understanding the small things, the super important. So I'll let Emily.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that the work that we were doing to translate the Ten Commitments into other languages was a very humbling experience for me, because I mean I pride myself on writing and editing, but did I was not aware of the different um, the various different terminology available and the different connotation it has in different cultures. I mean, even when it came to the design, uh, I learned a lot about spacing and kerning, and knowing that um, I think I still have some edits that were handed off to us at a conference that I haven't figured out, and also that concept of there's more than one interpretation. So there is a lovely volunteer who did the translating for free for us. And when I questioned her on some of it, thinking, oh, she just did it by herself and I want another set of eyes, I didn't realize the work she had put in um, to collaborate with other people and get different generational understanding. And I, had to have a real conversation where I owned up to my assumptions and misunderstanding, and I appreciate that she felt it, she actually was not. She was kind of combining my experience and other work experiences she had. So she really felt seen by us being able to get into it, and not me just going like, oh, well, it's my, I have the power. I'm going to decide the final outlook. And so yeah, with the humility, it's recognizing the strengths and weaknesses and not letting that awareness cloud your judgment. So it's not like I'm always right and
Mhm.
I can do no wrong, or I'm horrible, I can't do anything right. It's reminding us that we are fallible humans who are capable of great potential.
Yeah, I think my point was about gratitude, emphasizing gratitude for the little things, the small things in your life, and not constantly, striving to put your big ego forward, but being gracious and self-aware about in relation to other people. Having I don't need to have for instance, I don't need to have a mega mansion in order to be an important person. For me, I'm just happy to have a roof over my head, and yeah, not
Yeah.
being boastful, not putting that forward. And I hate to mention this person, but Donald Trump. I mean, he is the poster child of lack of humility.
Yeah, and Socrates is attributed as saying, "All I know is that I know nothing."
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so we'll move on to peace and uh, social justice. I will help people solve problems and handle disagreements in ways that are fair for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's great that this is connected right after humility, because there is also uh, the importance of apologizing and trying to improve on a harm cause, not letting that harm grow or uh, ruin potential relationships and partnerships. Because we recognize that we combined peace and social justice well, I think it was combined before us, but when we were looking at how to explain it, I think it's you can only get peace because of social justice. You can only, kind of get to that comfort level when you're addressing the problems. And this is we've sometimes in presentations had people say, well, why don't you talk specifically about racism, sexism, all these isms? And I think that we want, not only does this allow us to focus on the positive instead of listing all the problems with the world, but it goes again to, well, as we said in the beginning, the action, the what are you doing to relieve the world of those isms.
Mm-hmm.
It's the famous slogan when people are on strike and they're marching: "No justice, no peace."
Mm-hmm.
That directly connects these two concepts.
Yeah, we've gotten some criticism for not highlighting, like Emily said, why aren't you just talking about racism? And it's like, but there's more injustice in the world, and that's an important injustice that
Hmm.
we should strive to, you know, make the world an equitable and place for everyone, but it doesn't cover all of the injustices, like towards animals, or towards our planet, and or that kind of things,
Right.
violating people's rights, or violating the rights of the planet to
Yeah,
but
misogyny,
anyways.
religious bigotry. These are
Yeah, religious bigotry, the whole thing. I mean, wars, majority of the wars are because of over religion and territory. But yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes people also critique us saying, you should only do church state separation, or you should only be uplifting the rights of atheists and humanists. But as we've noted with the commitments all being connected, these injustices are all connected. A lot of the isms are because of the, biblical rules, or not just to blame the Bible, but these decisions of who is worthy of respect and power and being able to make decisions for other people. And so there's we want to make sure, especially when it comes to keeping our government secular, that we're kind of helping people break out of those assumptions and understanding, like, how do we actually see people? How do we serve people? How do we actually make this a world and a system that values all?
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have been criticized at times because my primary activism is secular activism. So, you said church state separation. I prefer the phrasing of government neutrality in matters of religion, but ultimately I think it's the same
Mhm.
thing. But I have to acknowledge, because I believe it's completely true, that if I could wave a magic wand and we achieved perfect secular governance, we won't have solved all of our problems. There's still a lot else out there, and it's true that a lot of those other problems, I'm not personally doing a lot on those, but I feel like I am doing my piece, and I'm doing my bit to make the world a better place. Even though I'm not solving all the problems, there are other people who are focused on other problems, and I'm quite happy to lend both moral and financial and through this podcast uh, other support to them. But I do what I can, and I think that like this criticism of whataboutism, you're not doing enough over here, you're doing so much over there that you're not doing enough over here, is sometimes done in good faith, but is often weaponized for people that only want to criticize, and it's not, and it's done in bad faith. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there are multifarious issues, and each one of us can make an impact somewhere, but no one of us can can change everything everywhere all at once,
Yeah.
even if it does make for a good movie.
Yeah. No, and I think in the education center, one of our big goals, and we talk about this all the time, is raising awareness is doing something. So we often cover topics. We're going to do upcoming webinar on food production and food insecurity. We're going to do one on gun violence, to simply raise awareness with our membership, to injustices across our not just in America but across the globe. So raising awareness for me is kind of my activism, as well as supporting and doing
Sure.
things. But yeah,
And through and when people are aware of things, they that can inspire them to take action as well.
right, right.
And that leads us to responsibility. And I will be a good person even when no one is looking, and own the consequences of my actions.
I think this is about accountability, being an accountable person, to your actions. I didn't behave well. I have to take responsibility. I've harmed
Mhm.
other people. I need to take the consequences of violating, a code of conduct. Okay, I need to be accountable, as an individual or a community. If we all just decided to do whatever we wanted to do and not take responsibility, it would be chaos.
Yeah, for me, this ties in most closely with the ethical development.
Mhm.
And sure, if you are perfectly ethically developed, then you won't make mistakes. But as we've now said several times, we are human and we are fallible, and we do make mistakes, sometimes even with the best of intentions. And the reason that this one resonated with me is that uh, if you stop at ethical development, then you fail at something, you could just be despondent about it, or just like, hey, I'll do better next time,
Right.
and just move on. And what responsibility does is that, no, you can't just move on. You need to own those consequences, repair, do what you can to repair the damage that you've done, and and then move on. It's not just an internal process of ethical development, as important as that is, but responsibility brings that forward into the impacts that you have on the world, and that you have to acknowledge and own the ramifications of the actions that you take. And that I thought was, like, it ties in beautifully with ethical development and extends it to be not just an internal process, but it matters what you do in the world. So I was really glad to see it there.
Yeah, when I define humanism, or whether to a religious person or non-religious person, I tend to emphasize that, like, we are the ones responsible for living meaningful lives. We could, need to depend on ourselves, and I feel like that resonates with many people, because they're aware, even if they feel like they get guidance from other forces, or they're influenced by other people, they're the ones who have to get out of bed each day, or decide whether they're ignoring their alarm or following it, decide how much they're going to get done, and how they're going to treat themselves when things don't get done, or how they're going to treat others who they interact with. Again, this is something that happens throughout our lives, because children can understand the impact that they have on someone else. Like, as they figure out their strength, they realize when they're hurting somebody, and what they do to make up for it. When they maybe help out with chores around the house, they understand, like, mommy and daddy don't do everything, and I can
Mm.
do things too. Or even the responsibility to ask for help and assistance when you need it, because we don't need to do all the things by ourselves, and we don't need to do them all right this instant. But in order to also to be accountable for someone else, we may need to ask for help, negotiate, figure out what their needs are.
Yeah, and take ownership of okay, well, I made a mistake and I screwed up, but I can only do better tomorrow, right?
Right. And now that brings us to the last of the 10 commitments, which is service and participation. I will help my community in ways that let me get to know the people I'm helping.
I think this one people are really grappling with. with COVID and the way things are going, really grappling with what is community and how do I participate in it and what does it mean? And I think this one is something that we need to really look at intentionally, how we are in service to a community, how do we belong, how do we participate, um, is something I think I've read like 10 different articles about what does it mean to be a part of a community, or to provide a service. And everyone seems to be grappling with this as our communities come apart. I don't know if anybody's ever, if you've read the book Bowling Alone, but we are really struggling with the whole essence of um, civic participation, um, and the whole idea of what constitutes a community.
And there's an assumption that religious communities are either the only or the best. Obviously, Kristin and I are biased, having been brought up in humanist communities and now supporting various ones across the country, and knowing how important they are and how much support and development they need. But we recently wrapped up the Secular Week of Action, which is also another opportunity, whether you have an established group or a temporary team, to serve your community, see what needs need to be met. And one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize is it's not just, coming into an area saying, I'm going to decide and I'm going to, throw paper towels at you or start making a hole and plopping a tree. It's about figuring out what works for the people in that region or the soil in that area, and making sure that, and there are definitely value to one and done projects, but there's more meaning to ongoing relationships and developing kind of continuous actions.
So the U.S. Surgeon General, I don't know if you're aware of this, came out with this that loneliness is an epidemic and it's killing us. Loneliness is like smoking 15 cigarettes. Is it 15 cigarettes a day? I can't remember how he, but anyways, um, the lack of engagement in community is really, it's an epidemic.
Right. And even the UK, they have a minister of loneliness. Not to promote loneliness, but to combat it.
So yeah, so one of the solutions is, if our religious community, to do what our religious communities used to do, which there is to join together and, as Emily said, intentionally be a part of a community that betters somebody else's life, and to do so in a way that is, and I'll say humble, with a sense of humility, coming in and not assuming you know what the answer should be, but embracing the people that are needing help and asking those questions about how is it that we could make your life better in community together.
Right. It's not just individual perspectives and individual actions, but what we do together as a group, as an organization, as an institution,
Yeah, how do we
and
solve
as a
food
society.
deserts? Yeah, how do we solve food deserts in urban areas? How do we make things greener? And as Emily said, we don't just go and, dig a hole and go, "Oh, let's put up a spruce tree here when it's Arizona." It's right? So, yeah.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end of our 10 commitments. Kristin Wintermute, Emily Newman, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I will put a link to the 10 commitments in the show notes, so people can go directly to that page if they want to read a bit more. Any last thoughts? And if people want to get involved more, I'll say, Kristin, any last thoughts from you today?
No, I just really appreciate talking about the 10 commitments. I think that it helps inspire us to act and honor humanist values. And so I just really appreciate being here and thank you.
All right. And Emily, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, definitely hope people enjoy the website. We're going to keep adding research to that as we can, and also hope that the commitments inspire you all to take whatever action you'd like. We've had some groups develop presentations and discussions and essay contests, so it's exciting to see what they can do.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time for speaking with me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support at patreon.com/podcast4inquiry and give us a 5-star review. Email us at podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web, centerforinquiry.ca. We are on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter or X at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazzaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. See you next time.